So why don't we get started to respect everybody that came in early, good students and all that. So my name is Chris Shula. I'm the VP of Sales and Strategy for CyberSecOp, and I want to personally thank you for attending this educational webinar. We've been running these every 2 weeks with some additions kind of inserted in based on client and prospect demand. But one of the topics and one of the most important topics that we're going to cover today is regarding the importance of tabletop exercises. On the next slide, you'll see the agenda that will kind of walk everybody through. Um, Oscar, if you could change that for us.
Sure.
Yep. So here's the agenda we're going to run through. One of the most important parts is really why do tabletops matter, all the way through some real world case studies on how tabletops can really affect and prepare an organization for ensuring that they actually know how to react under duress. That's one of the biggest things that we see all the time is, while some people might have a DR policy or an incident response policy and a run book, have they really kind of run it through? Have they really checked to make sure that, what they've documented is really going to work and is it the right people in the right places at the right time? On the next slide, where this kind of fits into overall security is something that I think gets overlooked at times. You change the slide, Oscar? There you go. And while tabletop, and you can see in green, is really one item, one line on this roughly 30 topics or 30 areas of consideration that cover both governance, compliance, and pragmatic security. It is the thing that sits down and role plays out all the other things that are in place, right? It takes a look at how prepared and capable you are of protecting yourself from an attack and how capable you are to recover. And this is kind of in that recovery phase, which then may put some light or pressure on some of the other elements. So want to make sure you kind of see the perspective of where tabletop exercises are and how they touch everything. And on the next slide, you'll kind of see why we feel that this is an important element. Statistically, we know, and not just from our statistics, we are a full service consulting organization. We even have incident response services that can handle everything, even through negotiation and payment of ransom, if in fact that's the best business decision. But we know third-party vendors, human error, and the beginning of everything is really phishing, right? So these scenarios, it's kind of a matter of when, not if it's going to happen. And we're seeing the rise of that changing and exponentially. One of the things that kind of anecdotally that I think is interesting is, and Oscar and I have been doing this for years, if you asked me 2 years ago, what was the outcome of these attacks, it was typically to sit down and kind of get to the honeypot of your PII data. What we've seen in the last 2 years is really a shift of the threat actor preventing you from conducting business, right? Stopping you from being able to serve your clients, whatever those clients are, whether that be students for higher ed, patients in healthcare, delivering product if you're manufacturing. And what we do know for a fact, talking to businesses of all sizes, is they know how much it costs to be down. They may not know what PII data costs or what that risk is and what the damage to brand, but they do know if I can't function, how much that is. And that's why, this ability to sit down and run through the exercise and make sure that you are prepared if in fact something happens to get up quickly is radically important. On the next slide, I think it's something that you guys have heard. Anybody that may be a sports fan knows is the best offense is a good defense, right? And everybody puts that to maybe Vince Lombardi or someone else out there, but it's a battle strategy, right? And this is where when we run through the process, and Oscar's going to lead you through that, of the tabletop being able to identify what is our defense, what is our offense, what do we have in place, and if in fact they breach that, what is our behavior and how quickly can we react and recover is what we're going to talk about today. So on the final slide for me is really just introducing Oscar, I believe. So Oscar is actually our CISO. He's been with the company close to 2 years, it feels at this point, might be just slightly less than that. But he and I work hand in hand. I run the strategy side of things. Oscar is responsible for our consulting organization, our CISOs, our risk managers, our policy writers, anything that we have as far as deliverable talent short of the testing side is underneath Oscar's guidance. And also he has firsthand knowledge working with accounts directly. So I think you'll really enjoy the conversation. And Oscar, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Chris. So, welcome everyone. As Chris stated, we're going to talk about tabletop exercises. These are extremely, they have to be completed in an environment, no matter where you are. They're a great exercise. They're better ways to get people ready for an actual event. So, we're going to go through that. So, what are tabletop exercises? Simulated scenarios that allow organizations to walk through their response to a hypothetical crisis or emergency in a low stress collaborative environment. So as we go through those tabletops, we know they can ask questions. We ask them questions. We take notes. We actually provide recommendations for them. It's really, it does two things. It shows us how quickly something can go off course. It also shows us what happens when an event occurs. Does everyone scramble and not know what to do, or do they follow the script that is going to be laid out for them? A lot of times they get really concerned about timing and whether or not they're saying the right thing, so they start to hold back from information. So we try to make sure we put them at ease while we're doing the process. So it's a very proactive approach. By doing it fairly often, I would say once a quarter or twice a year, is really about how do you address cyber threats? How do you evaluate their readiness and implement necessary improvements before an actual ransomware attack occurs? We know that in the news, we see it happen all the time, and a lot of people, you hear about a lot of smaller hospitals or actually county governments. It happens because usually those individuals are privately owned or publicly owned, and they don't have the money or they don't put the money towards making sure that the tabletop has been conducted and they're not ready for an event when it does happen. So why is it important? It helps identify gaps in their preparedness, test that incident response plan if they do have one. If not, we actually help you create one, and improve coordination among various teams and stakeholders. And it also allows for continuous improvement. We don't expect any tabletop exercise to be perfect. It's almost impossible to do so, but we want to make sure that the mistakes that we look for won't be repeated in a real life event. That's the most important piece. So, how do you do this? The crucial component of an organization's preparedness strategy. If you look at the dial, incident readiness, preparation and prevention, and preparation and prevention are the two most important things, at least that from what I can see from customers. Because how do you prepare for it and how do you prevent it? A lot of times we think because we are prepared, nothing's going to happen to us. I've seen multiple companies, and I've been in this industry for almost 30 years. I almost hated to say that. But what I've learned is that just because you're prepared doesn't mean you can prevent. And because you can prevent it doesn't mean you're prepared. So you think about the dynamics of that statement because I can do a lot of things. You drive every single day, but people still have accidents. They're prepared, they know what they're doing, but when an accident happens, do they overreact? Do they overcorrect when they're driving in the snow or in the rain? You got to be ready by practicing. And I'm not saying go drive in the snow and the rain extremely fast. What I'm saying is take a step back and just look at what you're doing today and how can it be better. Now, for incident response, how do you address and mitigate the impact of a security incident? What do you do? Who do you call? Who's involved in that process? What do we need to do next? We have an event that we've noticed that CPU rates are now at 100%. Are we being used for a Bitcoin mining strategy that someone put on malware for a long period of time and we didn't notice? And we had a situation where now we're having an actual ransomware attack and people are starting to see it more and more often. Threat actors, they look at as companies grow and get larger, those are the ones they want to attack right before that because normally a smaller company does not have the controls needed in order to prevent a ransomware attack. So that is why the tabletop exercise is so extremely important. Then recovery and learn. We go through this process, we talk about the improvement, and then post incident, what did we learn from this? What steps did we miss out of this process? What do we need to do better when it actually does occur for us? So we've got to look at all the parameters, which I think is the most important aspect as well, outside of the incident readiness. But recover and learn. If you don't learn anything from the mistakes you make, then you're doomed to repeat it. And we've seen companies that have had a ransomware attack, and then 6 months later, they have another ransomware attack because they weren't ready to actually be prepared for an actual event because they didn't learn anything new. They didn't write down any notes. They didn't take any information, or they could have had a massive turnover. So there are a lot of different aspects that could happen between the first event and the second event, because I can guarantee you that all threat actors are looking at where you were the day before the attack and where were you after the day of the attack. And you got to think about that on a consistent basis. All right, here are the stages of a tabletop exercise. Planning. We all know what planning is, but how do you get ready? You establish the objectives and the scope. What are the logistics? How many people are going to be in? What is the scenario? Um, and I've become fairly adept at creating scenarios that aren't just your run-of-the-mill. Right now, I'm working on a tabletop scenario where customer has satellites, but they've been hacked by a threat actor based in China, and we've in the tabletop, you find out that someone internally is feeding that information. So you think about, well, that probably wouldn't happen, but people get disgruntled at work and then they start to do things that could put the company at risk. So it's all about knowing who's doing what at what time and what do we need to be prepared for. And the tabletop scenario can be as creative as you want it to be, because you want people to think outside of the box. I'm not a huge fan of saying that term, but you want people to think about things that they wouldn't normally think about. If and let's go back to our scenario of driving a car in the rain or in the snow. What if your tire blows while you're in the rain and you're driving fast? What do? What steps do you take? Same thing with driving in the snow or an event or a tornado or something of that nature. Do you stop under the bridge before you get to the worst area? Or do you just say, you know what, I'm just going to wait it out and I'm just going to see how far I can drive? Two different types of individuals. They both have plans. One may be a good plan, the other one is a horrible plan. So you don't know that until you go through the actual exercise. So what you do in the participant briefing, you provide participants with an overview of the exercise, including scenario, their roles and responsibilities. And then you get those individuals on the call. Once you start with the execution process, you facilitate it, guiding them through the unfolding scenario. And it's usually built over, it's a 2-day time frame, but you're covering that within a 2-hour time frame. So it's a 2-day process, but it's only covered in 2 hours. So what you're doing is you're trying to make them make mistakes, because you want to see who folds under pressure, basically. And you want to see how they problem solve and to make decisions. You want to have individuals from the CIO, CEO, COO, but you also want to have engineers and directors and managers, because you want to see how they all interact with each other. Are they arguing with each other? Are they trying to overstep everyone because, oh, I know how to do this better than that person? It's about being collaborative at all given times. So as you assess the effectiveness of it, by analyzing the responses, you're going to identify strengths and weaknesses, and capture lessons learned to inform the rest of the team. So once you conduct the thorough review of the exercise, document the key findings, recommendations, and actions to enhance the overall cybersecurity preparation. Now, here's some of these cyber attack scenarios. For ransomware, simulate scenarios where ransomware affects systems, encrypts data, and demands a ransom payment. And we've seen ransom payments from 200,000 to $5 million. Most companies, smaller, middle size of nature, will not have $5 million. So that is when the negotiation portion starts. If it's a data breach, you're going to explore potential attack vectors that could lead to unauthorized access. This is by not doing updates. You're not doing patching on a consistent basis, or you're missing points of contact, or you look at your documentation through Intune or some other tool and see that someone hasn't logged in quite some period of time. Those are the ones that you need to worry about. And then for a DDoS attack, practice responding to denial of service that aims to overwhelm and disrupt an organization's online services. Most individuals are not prepared for that when it does occur. Again, this goes back to the panicking, making good decisions versus bad decisions. And now let's talk about advanced persistent threats. Simulate sophisticated attack that involves intrusion, lateral movement, and data exfiltration by highly skilled and persistent adversaries. They won't quit until they get some data. And then your insider threat is what we mentioned earlier. What happens if someone internally within the company starts to either abuse their access or start to give out information? We've seen it happen several times over the last few years, and it will continue. people do become disgruntled, they start to give away information because someone has promised them something. You have to worry about that. You may think, man, how in the world can I protect myself if I got to worry about all of these? And the answer is through practice, by doing scenarios to test your limits of where you are today versus where you need to be. So at our tabletop exercise workshop, designing a powerful workshop experience. Design, clarify objectives and outcomes, choose the right participants in a team approach, design an interactive scenario and inject, and then create, as you engage, create an interactive, safe, and no fault environment. You want people to be able to be a part of the process. You want to make it fun. You want to make sure you're learning. You want to make sure you're listening. But you want to ask probing questions to gain insight. That's the only way you'll find out exactly what needs to be changed. So you capture those issues, gaps, and the lessons learned, and then you prepare an after action report. This is going to be essential because that after action report will tell you where you failed or what things you could do to be stronger or better in across the board. And you want to create a specific near-term plan. So basically low-hanging fruit. All right, what could we fix today in this particular scenario? What did we not do well at? What did we do great at? What can we enhance our areas in? But you also want to provide them tools and guidance to boost that adoption. Because if I don't tell you what's wrong, or I don't pinpoint what you've done, or the question that you may have answered may have been vague and not given a precise answer, that's always going to come back to bite you later on. So it's about understanding where you are today, but where you need to be in the future. All right, so once you design it, you consider combining cybersecurity and physical cyber disruptions to create a realistic event. I don't want to give you anything generic, right? I want to make sure it makes sense for your company. If I go to a health company and I talk about finances, it's going to be mostly a miss. But if I talk about specific things within the health environment, as value-based care components of documented high trust information, how's that information being viewed, who has access to that data, I want it to be correlating to that particular company. I want them to understand what I'm talking about. If I put them into this scenario where they're not familiar with it, or I'm using words that, scenarios that they can't understand, it's not beneficial to anyone. So you want to make sure that they understand why you're doing it, but also tell them the story behind it. And you also want to do a deliberate attack. And this may be something that some people may have experience in, and it may be physical, and maybe cyber assets. It could be as simple as a thumb drive being plugged in. And I know it sounds very interesting because a lot of companies don't block USB ports. And I know you say that's not possible. Every company is doing that. And I can honestly tell you that probably 20% of the companies that we deal with are blocking USB ports. They have them wide open. And then they'll either that or they have an exception ability, which means that they can, if you're from the finance team and you can plug in your thumb drive, but only from an encrypted system that's created that thumb drive, so you can actually plug it in. But a lot of companies just don't have that data point. They don't have the resources to do so. So you want to think about the scenario as you're creating it. So you want to consider upstream and downstream effects. Who is affected? You want to interdependent sectors that will affect your response efforts, whether it be a third party, whether it be internal, whether it be just a classic vendor that you've been using for years and you've never done a third party risk assessment. So they all interconnect, and you want to understand your supply chain, because most of the companies that we see are hit from a third party perspective, from a client that we've worked with for a long time, that they don't have any security controls, and we've never asked them about those security controls. So you want to think about it holistically. How do they all interconnect? That's the most important piece of it.
I think the other thing to add to this, just as a little bit of color, is these can be hosted and should be hosted for a variety of folks, right? So we've done some that are just for IT and security. We've done some for just the C-suite and leadership or the board. We've done some that's a blend of that. So realistically, what we're seeing for organizations that are really taking this seriously as opposed to checking off the box, there's a matter of like, we've seen them where we start with the IT and security. They want to get their ducks in a row. They want to fine tune their process. Then they want to escalate it and evangelize their readiness or their need for additional security. So they are hosting those things for the leadership side of things. So really the collaboration that Oscar and his team take with each one of the clients, and should be done anywhere, whether it's CyberSecOp or not, is making sure that this is actually, really addressing the needs of the team and the organization. How is that best addressed?
Thank you, Chris. So let's talk about the workshop, right? How do we design a workshop experience? Do we have backups? Yes or no? I was just told by a company today that they haven't done backups in over a year. They have no idea what they've backed up. It does happen. So you talked about, hey, let's initiate a backup recovery process. Let's start a policy. Let's start a procedure for it. Do we pay the ransomware? And I know we've all said in a long time, we talked about how we don't pay terrorists, but it depends on what information they have. We probably should put that as an added bonus at the bottom of that statement, because if they have pertinent data that we don't have a backup for, it kind of takes away the ability for us to negotiate, because now we have to pay it. We just don't know how much yet. The main three scenarios: access to offsite backups and to rebuild the environment, have backups that were encrypted by ransomware and financial means, and no backups and no financial resources to pay ransomware. So a rebuild is inevitable. You would like to avoid number three, like the plague, because you don't want to have to. You don't have the backups. You don't have any financial resources, so your options are very, very limited. You're going to have to most likely rebuild the entirety of that. So you got to have certain things in place, and even just in order to be a part of the conversation about having the conversation with a threat actor. That's essential, because they're going to ask for money. That's what they do. So we're going to skip to the next couple of pages here. So key metrics and evaluation, comparison of key indicators used to assess the effectiveness. So what is the response time? How long does it take for you to get back on your feet? What's the decision-making quality? Is it good? Is it decent? Is it bad? Do we just say we're not going to have a conversation with the threat actors? That's a horrible idea, because you at least need to talk to them to understand exactly what they have. So you want a proof of life concept of information that they've taken from you, so that they can actually prove to you what does it cost and what is it worth to you. And let's talk about communication effectiveness, extremely important. And then incident containment. Have we stopped the incident, or is the incident still running wild in our environment? And then the last one, lessons learned. Again, this goes back to our initial conversation. What did we learn from this process? Did we actually gain anything from it? Do we think we're great? Do we think we're perfect? Do we think we did everything right? I can almost guarantee you that you've made some mistakes that may not be evident within the scenario, but if you go back and look at the details of everything that you said, because we record those sessions when you're having those conversations with threat actors, go back and look at what you've done and how you've done it, and then discuss what you could do better to make sure that you're not missing those points in the future. Now, here's the importance of preparedness. So if you look, respond, the entity must execute response and mitigation procedures and contingency plan. For reporting the crime, you should report the crime to criminal law enforcement agencies, such as the FBI or your local police department. And then report the threat. You should report all cyber threat indicators to appropriate federal agencies. And because that builds your case. When you have to call your cyber insurance company, they're going to ask you about the information of who you contacted, what was the name of that individual, how are they tracking it. So a lot of things have to occur from your side to just make sure that you are ready. And these are just things that we think of off the cuff, just to make sure that you are prepared when the event does occur. The entity must assess the incident to determine if there is a breach of protected health information. If you work in a health environment, it is something that you have to do, because you need to start now creating a communication plan to the individuals who have been affected by that particular breach. Why is it important? Just making sure that you have policies, procedures, identify vulnerabilities, clarifying roles. Everyone needs to know their place of what they need to do in the case of an event. So it's always something to keep in the back of your mind when you're doing this process. And CyberSecOps have been doing this for what, 10, 15 years now, Chris. And I think we have gotten very good at our process of how we do it, how we handle the conversation, how we speak to the threat actors through our negotiation. And it really makes it easier for you in the long run when we're involved in the process. And we guide you through it, and we basically hold your hand through the entirety of the process as well. So here's a real world case study. 2019, large financial institution conducted a comprehensive tabletop to simulate a large scale ransom attack. It involved the key stakeholders, legal, IT, executive teams, because it's extremely important to understand that everyone has their place, as we said before. Why is it extremely important? Because we need to know who's going to do what, who's going to be the voice of the conversation, who's going to be the voice of reason, and who else do we need to talk to and have conversations with while we're going through this process. We need to make sure that everyone understands what we're going to talk about, how we're going to discuss it. And we also want to keep the stress level as low as possible. Because if you are having a tabletop and you become upset or irate, and let's say you start yelling at the threat actor, most likely they will disconnect, and then they'll send your information to the dark web, and then there'll be nothing that you can do to get it back. So it's about maintaining a level consciousness and level headedness as you're having those conversations, but also identify a lack of PR and information releases. You want to, if there's an issue where someone, has partial information, they put it out, people are going to look at that, especially if you're a public traded company, because now they say, oh, well, they got it taken care of. And then 2 days later, you come back and say, oh, well, we're still working on it. That's going to be detrimental for your stock price. And it's going to drop very low very quickly.
And
So
even
what
if
are some, okay, sorry.
I'm sorry, even if there's not on the previous slide, even if there's not a lot of lessons learned, there's tremendous validation knowing that what you have in place is workable, is efficient, is covering everything, roles and responsibilities, all that stuff is locked down. So a good result with minimal findings is almost equally valuable to one that is a ton of information that needs to be, re-swizzled and reworked because it just wasn't efficient, it wasn't working, it didn't address the issues on a timely basis.
And actionable takeaways: strengthen cybersecurity preparedness, improve decision-making communication, enhance cross-functional collaboration. A lot of times teams work in silos. They don't have conversations with each other. Extremely huge mistake because you need to know what other teams are working on as well. Measure and benchmark performance. Leverage real-world case studies. What has happened out here that we have heard about, and how do we make sure we're not a victim of that? And also, please explore cyber insurance. They cover a lot of things like your legal fees and remediation process, and it covers a lot of your business interruption. So if you haven't looked at cyber insurance, that is something that we have several partners that we work with here at CyberSecOps. So that is something that we pride ourselves in doing. All right, here are the next steps. And I know we're running low on time, so this recording will be emailed to you. The presentation will be emailed as well. And Chris, would you like to talk about the deep dive discussions that we can set up with everyone?
Yep, if you would like to set up a conversation to figure out a little bit more detail than what was set up here, you can reach out to us via the correspondence you've already received. Our information's at the bottom of this as well. We do provide some discounts for our clients because we do understand a lot of the information that's already there. So there's not as much time spent on discovery. As you can imagine, there's information that needs to be gathered for every one of these to be effective through interviews, through artifact exploration, and then the choreography of the tabletop itself. And we are going to provide a discount for anybody that has registered and attended. So we're looking at doing that as well. And we really appreciate you guys joining us for this session. You can see the 3 other sessions that are coming up in April. And we have set up an Eventbrite site. So that'll be going out to anybody that's received any emails from us in the past, so you to be able to see the entire listing of upcoming events and be able to choose them separately rather than receiving individual emails from us on kind of a weekly basis. So thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate that. And we will look forward to talking to you in the near future. Oscar, thank you so much for a great job.
No problem. And thanks everyone for joining. Truly appreciate it.